during that time, he taught extensively. He was then appointed the abbot of Sarah Jane Monastery, and then many years later, he was situated at the Lama Tsongkhapa Institute, where he was instrumental in setting up the education program envisaged by Precious Lamas. And this included the basic program and the master's program. And specifically, he taught on Madhyamika in the master's program. So according to Mandala magazine, I just quote this, but that particular course was seen as a tour de force. So we'll probably also know his very wonderful book that was so splendidly edited by the Venerable Thupten Chodron called Insight into Emptiness, which is a kind of condensation of those teachings. So when we get to the 9th chapter, we'll have an opportunity of reflecting on that as well. But I thought to give the following quote because it really establishes the framework of our time together. So Geshe Jumpa Tekchok says, the Bodhicharyavatara is a most important text. It is easy to understand, and it has been composed by Indian and Tibetan scholars. Among those, the commentary based on which I shall be offering my explanation is the one composed by the omniscient Gyaltsab Sabje. From amongst thousands of scholars, he was the one who came to be the first of Lama Tsongkhapa's regents or successors after the latter passed away. So Geshe Jumpa Tekchok is saying that by way of introducing his own use of Gyaltsab Sabje's commentary, which we're also largely employing. He continues, as for the subject matter, in the beginning, the Buddha generated bodhicitta. In the middle, he collected or gathered the collections, and in the end, he attained enlightenment. Having obtained enlightenment, he turned the 3 wheels of Dharma. In general, the Bodhicharyavatara explains the intended meaning of the scriptures, referring to all the scriptures of the 3 turnings. Specifically, it explains the teachings of the Bodhisattva vehicle. It explains all that needs to be practiced by a person possessing the lineage of the Bodhisattva vehicle when going to the ground of the Buddha. So this is really a beautiful framing, I think, of our aspiration in the session ahead. We're also intending to practice the Bodhisattva lineage in order to obtain the ultimate ground of full enlightenment for the benefit of others. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Lou to very kindly lead the prayers. Thank you, Lou.
It would help if I unmuted. Taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And His Holiness advises reciting the following prayers. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. And while reciting these words, we should reflect on the impermanence and the lack of reality and phenomena, and conclude with a prayer of dedication. By this merit, may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. And next is the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the area triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed into concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage trained who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear, having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised as spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by illusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning, I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Outer Mandala. By the virtue of offering to you, assembly of Buddhas, visualize before me this mandala built on a base, resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. In a mandala. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. Mandala offering and requesting teachings. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna, Mandalakam Niyatayami.
So thank you very much. I'm just going to very quickly recap the material last week. And in case you're sort of feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the detail, this is very much a feature of the beginning of the commentary. All the commentaries that I've consulted spend an incredibly careful amount of time elaborating the first verse. And there are very specific reasons for that, which we'll look into more deeply today. So it's not time wasted in any, or it's not to be seen as a sort of frustration that we're taking so long with one verse, because it really sets the entire agenda, if you like, the project of our own time with the text. So I just want to mention that we have included the praise to Manjushri as His Holiness has recommended. And I think the fact that when Shantideva was reciting the text for the first time to the monks in the monastery, and he rose up miraculously into the sky when he arrived at the 34th verse of the 9th chapter, which said, when real and unreal both are absent from before the mind, nothing else remains for the mind to do, but rest in perfect peace from concepts free. While he's reciting that, he rose up and Manjushri appeared above him, rising up simultaneously. So it was a kind of double vision occurring. So this indicates, of course, the incredibly special relationship between Shantideva and Manjushri. Indeed, as Kunsung Peldon notes, he says, although for his own part, Shantideva claimed to be no more than an ordinary man, Jatari, an Indian scholar of Madhyamika and Pramana, tells us that he was considered to be a manifestation of Manjughosha. So it's for this reason that His Holiness invites us to recite the praise before the teaching, because we're seeking Manjushri's blessings to facilitate our success and to increase our enjoyment of studying together this incredible text. So last week, in order to inspire us, I touched upon the marvelous and awe-inspiring qualities of Shantideva. And I also sought to capture, if you like, the character of the text by noting how it is eminently suitable for those wishing to enter, i.e. take their very first steps on the Bodhisattva path. This is why Geshe Jumpa Gatso refers to it as an easy text to understand. It's easy because it's exactly designed to be accessible to us right now. That is the ease. So it's really a manifestation of the Guru Shantideva's unbelievable kindness in knowing how to present this incredibly rich material in such an easily accessible or even digestible manner. So this is why His Holiness, as I sort of emphasized last week, recommends that we don't just read this book or this text as we might read any other kind of text, and we don't see it as an object of academic study alone either, because this would be to miss the essence of the text, which is to right now start stepping forth on the Bodhisattva path. So then I broached the topic of translations, and I indicate that we're going to mainly rely on Batchelor's translation, as does His Holiness, but this isn't to dismiss the other translations. And as I mentioned also, when we get to the 9th chapter, I'm going to be resorting to other translations, because Batchelor absorbs a whole commentary into his translation, and it becomes very difficult to discern where Shantideva begins and ends because of that. So I also made mention of other key texts, both oral contemporary texts and some of the classical canonical texts of the ancient tradition. And so we're going to load up the Google folder with many of those texts. So you're actually going to have a superabundance of material to work with. So if something flashes past while I'm presenting, don't sort of panic, because if you do spend a little bit of time resorting or referring to some of those texts, and particularly the oral commentaries, contemporary oral commentaries, you'll have many, many opportunities of revisiting the points from different angles and aspects. And then I went on to talk about the general structure of the text, and in terms of the chapters and how they relate to the 6 perfections, and whether we can establish direct concordances or relationships or reflections between the two symmetrically or not. And again, this is a very important topic, and it's one that I spent some time on, because it's actually introducing us to the manner in which the text is easy to practice. In other words, it's sequentially unfolding its topics in line with our burgeoning baby bodhicitta mind. This is really something remarkable to think about. And if we contrast it to some of the other very, very profound texts like Illumination of the Thought and so forth, we're already assuming an incredibly high level of realization and knowledge when we approach those texts. And so for that reason, they are perhaps not immediately available to us. Not to say we shouldn't study them, of course, but it's a very different experience. So we then looked at the title in some detail, because particularly this notion of engaging in the title is more accurately sort of seen as entering. So we're entering the path at the very beginning. And this is probably the most precious and extraordinary step we'll ever take. Because if we enter the path with a deep conviction of why we're doing so, that will become the cause of obtaining our own enlightenment on behalf of others. And so there is nothing that will please a Buddha and our gurus manifesting as manifestations of the Buddhas other than the offering of that practice to them. There is nothing more extraordinary, more delightful. So it's an incredible privilege, in other words, to have this karmic opportunity of not only knowing the text exists, but being able to spend some time with it. So I'm a fellow traveller with you. I'm not setting myself up as a teacher. I'm just seeking to sort of help structure or navigate our approaches together into the text. So we then looked at the translator's homage, which indicated that the text belonged to the sutra basket. And I then introduced Shantideva's homage, which was, respectfully, I prostrate myself to the Sagatas, who are endowed with the Dharmakaya, as well as their noble sons and all who are worthy of veneration. I then outlined the reasons for paying homage, and there were three principal reasons. Firstly, the words, by expressing the qualities of special objects and going for refuge, one comes to understand that a holy being, paying homage to a holy being, creates the causes to become holy beings ourselves. It's very, very interesting, isn't it? By removing the obstacles to the composition, which is another reason for paying homage, we dismiss or kind of avoid any interferences that might prevent the successful delivery and unfolding of the topic. So this is also referring to our practice. If we pay homage at the beginning of a practice, we avert the possible interruptions that might waylay us on the way. And the end result of paying homage, which has already been intimated by the first one, is that oneself will also obtain definite goodness. And definite goodness here is referring to liberation from cyclic existence, and thus all forms of suffering. However, as we know from a Bodhisattva vehicle perspective, we're seeking to do that with the principal aim of being best situated to benefit others. So last week's presentation was intricate and perhaps somewhat difficult, but this is because it takes a lot of care to unpack even the key terms Sugata and Dharmakaya, which are found there prominently in that first stanza. So today we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at a topic of vital importance, which is the Buddha's inestimable qualities. Why? We can't realistically take refuge in the three jewels and seek to act with love, compassion, and pure ethics, protecting others, what Shantideva calls deeds in his title. That is, we can't ourselves seek to follow and engage in the Bodhisattva's way of life if we lack a clear comprehension of the goal and its extraordinary capacities. Nor will we recognize how to develop our own enlightenment potential. We would be flying blind, as it were. So by paying homage to the great beings, we create the causes to become holy beings ourselves, just as Shantideva has done. So this really brings Shantideva very, very close to us, doesn't it? So if we relate this in a little bit more detail, Geshe Jumper Tekchok says, when sincerely praising a special being, a lot of merit is created. And with merit, one is able to avert hindrances. There is another purpose. It enables the temporary attainment of higher status and the ultimate attainment of the peace of definite goodness, nirvana. The Buddha said, this is Geshe Jumper Tekchok, even a little praise of Buddha, if it is sincere, will lead to the happiness of humans and gods, and then it will become a cause of obtaining nirvana. In the sutra Gache Ropa, Buddha said that by praising the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, a person accumulates a great deal of merit and will thereby be able to pacify suffering and experience happiness. Similarly, by having merit, that person will progressively be able to make progress and be able to achieve whatever is their desire. Then, having pacified harm and hindrances due to demons and evil companions, enlightenment will be attained. The Buddha said this in many scriptures. So, of course, the value of prostration to the triple gem must be understood in terms of the qualities of the refuge objects, but mainly the refuge object of the conqueror Buddha, because it's from the conqueror Buddha that the other refuge objects spring. Geshe Yeshe Tobten, following from Galtsabje's commentary, says, the Sagatas, or those who have obtained a blissful state, are the Buddhas who possess the Dharmakaya, the mind that has perfectly purified itself of all afflictions and accumulated all virtues. They are also endowed with the realizations of the two truths. The eradication of mental afflictions in the mind of a Buddha has three characteristics. It is perfect, it is permanent, and it concerns the totality of afflictions in all their aspects. End of quote. So the state of mind, which is naturally pure, being perfectly purified of all the adventitious defilements or afflictions, refers specifically to true cessation. Whereas the mind that has accumulated all virtues in dependence on true cessation refers to the truth of the path, because the mind of a Bodhisattva who is accumulating all virtues is also a Dharma jewel. So this is a very interesting point. The true cessation itself is regarded as a Dharma jewel. And the one who carries the true cessation in this case is referring to the Buddha jewel. So the Dharma jewel is specifically a path consciousness. It's one leading to and culminating the full realizations and capabilities of an enlightened one. There we can also say that the term Dharmakaya refers to true cessations and true paths, those leading to true cessations, and thus together refer to the third and fourth noble truths. So in the context of the first stanza, in fact, the first line in our English translation, the word Sagata refers to the Buddha jewel, the Dharmakaya refers to the Dharma jewel, and the Sagata's children, or mentioned sons, in our translation, refers to the Mahayana Sangha jewel, who are encapsulated by the lines, as well as their noble sons and all who are worthy of veneration. It's in this way that we have reference to all three supreme refuge objects encapsulated in the very first verse of the homage. Therefore, homage can be considered a complete and totally comprehensive practice in its own right. And it can also be seen as a fundamental supporting practice in that it can catalyze the quality or the ripening of our merit to encourage even more powerful merit to be accumulated. So last week I gave an example of paying homage to the Triple Gem and supplicating them before offering a mouthful of food to a yapping dog, in order to create a very particular kind of karmic connection with that animal, but also to embed the karma of generosity in this case into the momentum of our Bodhisattva path. We're sort of ensuring that that action can ripen in the most wonderful way. And it's really important at these moments, of course, to think deeply, because in rescuing a worm, for example, we create a karmic connection, which is the granting of fearlessness in this case. And that karmic connection can definitely ripen in the future. We'll meet that being, and not only that, we'll be in a position to immediately help them because we have established that cause maybe many, many lifetimes ago with that bodhicitta motivation. So this is really something to very deeply reflect upon. So understanding the word sugata is also requiring some careful unpacking. And last week I did touch upon this, but when we say in the first line, signs, respectively, I prostrate myself to the Tathagatas, the word sugatas there can be broken down into su, meaning great bliss or great happiness, and gata, meaning gone or completely gone. So to put these two back together again, the meaning of sugata is that by relying on the blissful Bodhisattva path, one obtains the result of the ultimate enlightened state, which is a state where one has gone completely beyond cyclic existence. So Gyaltsabje, in his commentary, likewise explains that the term sugata relates to two things: abandonment and realization. And here, realization particularly relates to the Dharmakaya, the truth body of a Buddha. So we'll have an opportunity to look at that a little bit more, but Gyaltsabje enumerates three qualities of excellent abandonment that are defining the qualities of an enlightened being. Through analogy, he says, similar to a person possessing a good body, if one has exhaustively abandoned the afflictive obscurations, then one has gone to the good or the beautiful. So this is referring to the Su, the great bliss. Similar, second one, similar to having purified completely a contagious disease, one has gone beyond falling into cyclic existence through the power of the afflictions. And thirdly, similar to a well-filled vase, having gone to all and thus having gone to bliss through having exhaustively abandoned the non-afflictive ignorance. This is referring to the obscurations to omniscience. So Geshe Jumpa Tekchok, in his account, gives a similar presentation. He says, in brief, sugata means having gone to a result in which happiness, there is happiness through having practiced a cause, a path, which is happiness. Sugata has the connotation of consummate qualities of abandonment and realization. For abandonment, there is the sugata of abandonment with three qualities, and for realization, there is a sugata of realization with three qualities. In the term, so we'll now enumerate those two sets. So firstly, in terms of the sugata's quality of abandonment, the obscurations of the afflictions are abandoned in such a way that they have been extinguished. A Buddha has abandoned the afflictions irreversibly, without exception. They have abandoned all afflicted and non-afflicted obscurations. So this indicates that the abandonment of a Buddha is superior to that of others, and therefore it indicates the unique quality of a Buddha. The Forders, for example, they're ones who are practicing very advanced dhyani states of absorptive concentration, can reach the peak of cyclic existence, as we know, very, very high level of bliss for in which they dwell for vast periods of time. But because they haven't uprooted the fundamental seed or the cause of the afflictions from their mind stream, when that karma to be in that state is exhausted, they can fall back down again. So they've never actually departed samsara. And they're disinclined to feel the need to abandon on a deeper level because they're immersed in bliss. So there's a kind of entrapment there in the state of bliss itself. So that bears thinking about. So when a Buddha, on the other hand, obtains this abandonment of the afflictions, he or she does so in the sense of having actually extinguished them, utterly extinguished them. So it's also the case that a Buddha has abandoned them irreversibly, because sometimes afflictions can be abandoned and then they come back again. Has anyone had that experience? We put a lot of effort into abandoning our afflictions, but given the right set of conditions, just take the mind of anger, for example, they rear up as though we had never, ever applied a remedy to them in the past. We go, oh my gosh, what on earth is happening to my path? It's in shatters. This is because of the incredible momentum in our karmic sort of stream, if you like, of the imprints of past non-virtuous or afflicted actions. So when a Buddha abandons a portion of the afflictions, if they've abandoned all the portions, there is no anything remaining that can return an affliction to that mind. So it's effortless to be pure. It is spontaneous, total purity, continuously unfolding with no danger of anything creeping back. This is really quite remarkable. So stream enterers and once returners, referring to those on the Hinayana vehicles, have also abandoned the afflictions, but it's said that they can reoccur again if certain conditions are met. But for a Buddha, they can't. So these are topics to explore. And the third quality, the afflicted and non-afflicted faults have been abandoned without exception. And so in the case of hearers and solitary realizers, they haven't abandoned them without exception because they have still got the subtle imprints of the obscurations to omniscience remaining. And that's preventing, amongst other things, them from seeing the two truths simultaneously, for example, which is another unique quality of the Buddha. So we'll now go on to the Sugata of realization, and that's again threefold. Realizing thusness directly indicates a superiority over the forwarders. You notice here it's not indicating a superiority over the hearers and solitary realizers because they also realize thusness perfectly, emptiness perfectly. And they realize firmly, which is another attribute of realization, which means that their exalted knowledge cannot degenerate. And thirdly, they realize without exception, meaning there is nothing remaining to be realized whatsoever, which again indicates this superiority over hearers and solitary realizers. So Geshe Jumpa Gatso, following from Gyaltsab Sabje, indicates by way of encapsulation, he says, thus there is a Sagata of abandonment and a Sagata of realization. We can explain the unique qualities of a Buddha in connection with the term Sagata, qualities that even hearers and solitary realize that are foe destroyers do not have. We could base an extensive explanation of this on the verse at the beginning of the commentary on valid cognition. Homage to the one who has become valid, who has assumed the task of benefiting sentient beings, teacher, Sagata, protector, end of quote. So the meaning here in Sagata is very similar to that in the Tibetan word Sangye, which is what we translate as Buddha. And we actually miss out on something in English when we translate as Buddha, because Sang refers to freedom from, i.e. abandonment, which is referring to having become free of afflictive and non-afflictive knowledge and knowledge obscurations, like a person becoming free of sleep upon awakening, with the idea of sleep having become non-existent. That's an analogy to explain. And Ge means expanded or increased, meaning that the Buddha's intelligence has become so expanded that there is nothing left where it can be said that a Buddha does not know this, a Buddha does not realize this. In other words, a Buddha embraces all objects of knowledge. So perhaps now, and only now, are we in a position to understand without any ambiguity or doubt what the word Dharmakaya means. Gyaltsabje states the Dharmakaya is the naturally pure sphere, free from all stains, which is the Dharma jewel, and those possessing it are the ones gone to bliss. Thus, to sort of encapsulate, the one who possesses the Dharmakaya uniquely is the one gone to bliss. So Gendoga glossed Gyaltsabje's definition and said, the Dharmakaya is the naturally pure state, free from all stains, and it refers to the truth of cessation within the Buddha's continuum. Having presented the definition of the Dharmakaya, that is naturally pure from all stains, which is the Dharma jewel, Gyaltsabje goes on to explain that those possessing it are the ones gone to bliss. Thus, the first line encompasses all three jewels: Tathagatas, the Buddha jewel, possessing the Dharmakaya, the Dharma jewel, and their children, the Sangha jewel. So we can go into this in a little bit more detail. Endowed with the Dharmakaya refers to the sphere that is naturally pure. And it's naturally pure because it's free of adventitious stains. So in general, we can say that the mind is pure. It is not marred or besmirched in the slightest by natural stains. If it were, the stains would have to enter the entity of the mind. In other words, they'll become insubstantiated in the nature of the mind itself as its natural character. In other words, the mind and its stains would become inseparably, emphasizing inseparably, one. But fortunately, the natural stains have not entered the entity of the mind, because the mind by nature is clear light. So there are many, many interesting topics that unfold from that point, particularly from a tantric perspective. So our minds are pure of natural stains, but are obscured by adventitious stains, ones that are created through causes and conditions which besmirch and kind of discolor, if you like, the natural purity of the mind, for as long as we're not Buddhas. When we become Buddhas, our minds, which are naturally pure, gain or acquire the additional feature of being free of adventitious stains. This is because the adventitious stains have been, as we've been describing, extinguished. The naturally pure mind, free of adventitious stains, is the truth body. And the truth body is referring to the exalted wisdom truth body and to the nature body, or sometimes we say the nature truth body. So the technical terms for these twin aspects of the Dharmakaya are the Jnanakaya, or wisdom body, referring to the blissful omniscient mind of the Buddha, and the Svabhavakaya, or the nature body, which is referring to the emptiness of the Buddha's mind itself. So the key point here is that those endowed with Dharmakaya are necessarily a Buddha jewel. As Geshe Yeshe Topten says, therefore, the eradication of mental afflictions in the mind of a Buddha is superior to that of an Arhat on the Hinayana path, for the latter has eliminated the seeds of the afflictions, but not because of the imprints of the afflictions, the obscurations to omniscience. So if you return to the three qualities of abandonment pertaining uniquely to a Buddha, we can say that hearers and solitary realizers have the first two, namely the obscurations of the afflictions are abandoned in such a way that they have been extinguished, and secondly, the obscurations of the afflictions are abandoned in such a way that they cannot return. But they lack the third. The afflicted and non-afflicted faults have been abandoned without exception. This is because, as noted, the non-afflicted faults in the guise of the obscurations to omniscience remain. They are only overcome for those beings at the end and culmination of their travelling on the Bodhisattva path and attaining the culmination of the last Bodhisattva bhumi. So His Holiness kind of wraps all these topics up together in an incredibly lucid and very, very beautiful passage. He says, a Sugata who has the Dharmakaya starts by abandoning negative emotions, at which point she reaches the first of 10 levels of the Bodhisattva path. She then proceeds along the path to Buddhahood until she reaches the level of no more learning. At that moment, she realizes the perfectly pure absolute space, the absolute nature, and the absolute body, which is the Dharmakaya. As obscurations to ignorance fall away, all qualities of primordial wisdom appear. And these qualities are the pure qualities of the Dharmakaya. What is left after all the obscurations have been eliminated, we're still quoting His Holiness, is called primordial wisdom. The realizational aspect of the Dharmakaya is the culmination of the truth of the path, while its elimination aspect is the culmination of the truth of cessation. Together, these two truths constitute the Dharma, the second of the three jewels when we take refuge. The Dharmakaya is thus the ultimate aspect of the Dharma. The Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, which manifest, this is referring to the Buddha's other bodies, when they manifest in the Dharmakaya, constitute the Sangha of beings who have obtained the path of no more learning. And the Buddha, who is free of defects and endowed with all the good qualities, is the one who possesses the truth of the path and the truth of cessation. These three, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, are the three absolute refuges. The assembly of Mahayana Bodhisattvas, the hearers and the Pratyeka Buddhas who are progressing on the path, can be called the supreme community of Sangha. It is to them, along with other teachers worthy of veneration, that Shantideva prostrates here. So just to touch a little bit more on the meaning of noble sons and all others, A Bodhisattva on the path of accumulation ascends through all the levels until the first of the 10 Arya grounds is achieved upon realizing emptiness directly. And at that point, the person is said to be born into the lineage of the Tathagatas. This means that at that point, the Bodhisattva is firmly, and we're emphasizing firmly here, born in the family because of having realized emptiness directly. They have abandoned all the fetters of the path of seeing, because they're moving on, and they have, because of that moving on, have become firmly ensconced in the lineage of a Buddha. At this point, it's absolutely unshakable, that lineage. So when we say son of a Buddha, or today I'm born in the family of Buddha, we're referring to a time when a person obtains a Bodhisattva path of accumulation. Then that person will attain the small, medium, and great paths of the path of accumulation, then the 4 levels of the path of preparation, heat, for peak, forbearance, and highest dharma. Then, upon achieving the first ground and the path of seeing of the Bodhisattva vehicle, it is said, this person has been born in the lineage of the Tathagatas. So you can see here that we're clearly aiming ourselves to be born, truly born into this lineage. So just to boil all this down, noble sons or noble children refers to the Arya Bodhisattvas as well as to the true paths and the true cessations in their continuums. In Geshe Tekchok's words, the sons of Buddhas, the oceans of excellence, refers to the Sangha. The sons of Buddhas are the Bodhisattvas, such as the 8 close ones, Chenrezig, Venerable Maitreya, and so on. So the meaning of to all who are worthy of prostration, which comes at the end of that stanza, indicates Arya beings also on the Hinayana paths, because they have also generated true cessations, independence on true paths in their continuum. So this is something worth bearing in mind. So we must include those arhats also in our refuge field. Otherwise, we're leaving something out, which is showing a lack of understanding of what a true cessation and a true path actually means. In other words, our refuge will be incomplete. So how can we relate this to ourselves? And we must relate it to ourselves. Our own minds are naturally pure or free of natural stains, but we are currently obscured or covered over, if you like, by adventitious stains. And this will remain for as long as we're not Buddhas. When we become Buddhas, as His Holiness so eloquently described, our mind, which is naturally pure, acquires the new feature of being free of adventitious defilements. In other words, the adventitious stains of our own mind will be utterly extinguished and will not be able to return. So our naturally pure mind, now free of the adventitious defilements, is itself qualified to receive the label, the truth body, of which there are 2, the exalted wisdom truth body and the nature body. So we've covered those points. So this is perhaps unimaginable from where we currently stand, but nonetheless, it's incredibly important to recognize this situation in these terms, because it creates a direct link, in fact, a causal link between our current stance and our own future enlightenment. It is not remote at all from this perspective. So it's incredibly inspirational. I just wanted to mention a technical note on true cessations. I'll just cover this very quickly for those who are studying this topic. Although there are two nature bodies, one from the point of view of the purity of natural stains and one from the point of view of the purity of the adventitious stains, only the latter is designated as a true cessation. Why? Because a true cessation is posited from the point of view of eliminating something. Because the purity of natural stains is already there, there is no cessation of natural stains. Very, very interesting point. This is because our clear light mind, which we referred to earlier, is never in the aspect of natural stains, meaning stains that are there, found there, established there by virtue of the nature of our mind itself. And as I mentioned before, if they were to be found there by way of nature, which is to say intrinsically with the mind, inseparably, then there is no basis whatsoever upon which enlightenment would be possible. So this is actually a profound proof of the possibility of enlightenment. And not just that, but profound presentation of the truth of the potential of our own enlightenment, as indeed the enlightenment of every other sentient being. So this is actually the base of our bodhicitta motivation, if you think about it, because not only do we have this potential, but so absolutely equally, as His Holiness continually reinforces, does each and every other being. His Holiness refers to it as our birthright, meaning that it's our kind of ultimate potential sitting with us right now. It's already here, waiting to be developed. So, thus we arrive at the notion of a Buddha lineage, which has two aspects. We're referring here, some of it's called Buddha nature, isn't it? We have a natural abiding Buddha lineage and a transformational Buddha lineage. So I'm just going to quickly look at those. The naturally abiding Buddha lineage is the emptiness of the mind that is yet to abandon defilements and that is able to transform into the nature dharmakaya of a Buddha. If it wasn't empty, it would be unable to transform. This is the point. So this capacity to transform, in dependence on the empty nature of the mind itself, is referring to the transformational Buddha lineage, and more specifically to the removal of the adventitious stains, which are impermanent phenomena. Because they're impermanent phenomena, they arise in dependence on causes and conditions. Because they arise in dependence on causes and conditions, we can remedy them, oppose them, eliminate them by setting up their counterforce. And this is the whole essence of the path, of course. So Geshe Tekchok says that a true cessation is designated from the point of view of eliminating the obscuring adventitious defilements on top of, and I emphasize on top of, the purity regarding natural stains. This on top of, this dependence on, in the sense of being a basis of, carries great significance, as it gives us a way of establishing enlightenment is possible. So I'm going to quote Alex Berzin here. According to Prasangika Madhyamika, the naturally abiding family trays, so he refers to lineage as family trays, which is rather meaningful, isn't it? Are the voidness imputable on the basis of the stained mind of each individual limited being. This is the same as the Svartantrika Madhyamika presentation, except that the assertion of voidness is different. So we'll just put that out there. Person continues, the evolving family trays, or I've translated that as the transformational Buddha trays, are the factors imputable on the basis of the stained mind of each limited being that are suitable to become the essential natures of the Buddha bodies that are conditioned phenomena. Here, the Buddha bodies include not only deep awareness, i.e. the Dharmakaya, but also the form bodies of a Buddha that the limited being can obtain. Thus, the transformational Buddha family trays include the actual enlightenment building networks, these are Berzon's words, of both deep awareness and positive force, referring to the accumulation of merit, imputable on the stained mind of each limited being once that being has attained a building up pathway mind. So again, understanding this will be enormously valuable in clarifying and sort of steering our determination to develop the awakening mind, as well as recognizing that we must develop love and compassion for all suffering mothers who, just like ourselves, are suffering due to a mistake, if you will. This is because adventitious defilements depend, in turn, on grasping at things and persons as existing inherently, really, by way of their own nature and so forth. So once this ignorance is overcome, this self-grasping ignorance, we no longer create throwing karma, which is that karma which has the force, when ripened, to throw us into another round of psychic existence through the presentation of the 12 links and so forth. So we'll move on. Kunsang Pelden takes a slightly different aspect, but still a very, very valuable contribution to the topic. In his extensive commentary on this verse, he indicates that the Dharmakaya, the body of a Buddha, of the Dharma, can be understood according to two inseparable, that word is important, inseparable aspects. The Dharmakaya utterly unstained, and the Dharmakaya of transmission. And to support this point, he quotes from Maitreya's Uttara Tantra Shastra. Quote, the Dharmakaya should be understood as two, the Dharma Dhatu, utterly unstained, and then the corresponding causes of the same, the teaching in its aspects both profound and vast. So profound and vast here referring to all the method aspects of the path and to all the wisdom aspects of the path. So in other words, says Kunsang Pelden, there is the Dharma body, that is the realization of the 10 strengths of a Buddha and so on. And there is the cause of this realization, the cause that is attuned to it, namely the Dharma body, which is the profound and vast Dharma of transmission in all its categories. And it is this that the Buddha is said to possess. So, in other words, as we've already noted, unlike the cases of hearers and solitary realizers, the Sagata's qualities of elimination are thoroughly and perfectly accomplished and totally complete. And it is in this that they can be said to have gone completely and perfectly beyond, because there's not the slightest detail of the supreme qualities of complete realization and elimination that they haven't realized or accomplished. And so Kunsang Pelden uses a very beautiful image here. He says, it is though they were vessels filled to the brim. So I'm just going to very quickly run through the 10 powers, which Kunsang Pelden mentions, because it really does inspire us, I think, to wish to become enlightened beings as well. Firstly, a Buddha knows without any doubts the positive and negative effects of virtuous and non-virtuous karma. Secondly, they know even the smallest consequence of a specific cause, as well as the precise relation between cause and effect, i.e., the colours on a peacock's tail. Thirdly, they know the various attitudes and dispositions of each individual, and hence understand each being's inclination. Fourthly, they know the disposition of each individual and hence give teachings accordingly. Fifthly, they know the ability and give teachings in a concise form to those of higher ability, and in a detailed and expansive form for those with a lower ability. I had to laugh when I was thinking about this point, because it seems the other way around for us, doesn't it? You have to teach those with lower intelligence at some length, because it takes longer to acquire what's being said. So I'm not laughing at us here, I'm just laughing in general. It's quite funny, isn't it, to contemplate. Sixthly, knows all the paths and their respective causes, and knows the causes that will bring a good human rebirth, etc. They know all the dharmas or phenomena that must be abandoned and all those that must be sought after. They know all former lives, and they know the transmigration of beings in the universe in detail, and they know the extinction of all forms of contamination. So if we're wanting to go into this a little bit more, Geshe Topton deals with this presentation very extensively on pages 20 to 21 of his commentary. But for my own sake, I wanted to just quickly share with you a very beautiful story of little Ali, to illustrate how Buddha's knowledge exceeds that of even the Arhats. So little Ali was a not very smart monk who was called Little Ali because he was born at a crossroad, a little crossroad apparently. So he's called Chuda Pantaka. And though he was given instruction by many highly realized Sangha, he was found incapable of recalling or recollecting even the smallest stanza. By the time it got up to the second syllable, he'd forgotten the first. If he remembered the first, he couldn't remember the second. So his elder brother, Maha Pantaka, who was also a monk, was so frustrated with his brother's failure to learn that he grabbed him by the neck and threw him out of the monastery. Isn't that brutal? Distraught and weeping, Chuda Pantaka went to the Buddha and confided the reason for his tears. "I'm neither a monk nor a layman," he said. "I'm a great idiot, a great fool." The Buddha replied, "There is no fool but the one who thinks he is smart," and gave him 2 lines to meditate upon. "I remove the dust, I remove the dirt," and sent him to clean the monk's shoes and the gompa. As Geshe Nawandagi describes in his account of the story in Anthology of Well-Spoken Advice, So he swept and swept, repeating those phrases year after year. And finally, through all this purification, he at last realized that the dirt and the stains to be gone were not external, but dwelt within the mind. And in this remarkable fashion, came to see ultimate reality, and eventually he too became a liberated being who overcame his internal enemies. End of quote. So the point here is that it is only a Buddha's omniscient mind. It's only a Buddha carrying those 10 powers we've just described very briefly that can give the precise instruction leading to little Ali's accomplishment of high spiritual goals, because the Buddha could see in his karmic past, distant past, some seeds of virtue that could be ripened if approached in a particular way. So whereas Chuddapantaka's brother couldn't see anything to rescue, the Buddha could. And so this way, the Buddha's compassion is unexcelled, of course. So we can relate the story of little Ali to ourselves. We're to understand that the omniscient, all-kind Buddha gave this unbelievably kind instruction in order to rescue this one sentient being in the most perfect manner imaginable. So each of us shouldn't hold any doubt that we also can definitely develop our potential, as did little Ali. Indeed, the very fact that we're wishing to currently train in the courageous steps of the Bodhisattvas indicates we are already able to ripen karmic seeds of virtue related to past actions, perhaps performed even countless lifetimes ago. This is a point that Lama Zopa Rinpoche often mentions. And he says to even hear the word emptiness, it requires incredible past merit. And so to even hear the word bodhicitta requires incredible past merit. And to be able to penetrate the meaning even more so, and to wish to practice the Bodhisattva's path even more so. So we are incredibly fortunate already. So I just wanted to quickly mention here a related topic, which is the two kinds of refuge. We can talk about causal refuge and resultant refuge. So causal refuge refers to the means by which we train ourselves to obtain an ultimate refuge. When we go for refuge to the resultant refuge, what we mean is that we proceed from the point of view of our own future enlightenment. In other words, we take refuge in our own future enlightenment. So I thought to raise this because it's really going to enrich our notion of homage. Because in a very real sense, when we prostrate to the triple gem, we're prostrating to our own future enlightenment. And so we're bringing the result into the path as a cause in the same manner that we do when we practice our tantric deity self-generation. So this requires a distinction to be made, doesn't it, between our own future enlightenment and the fact that it doesn't exist now. We're not fooling ourselves. We're not saying we're already enlightened. Because nonetheless, it is the resultant refuge that finally benefits us. So the resultant refuge is specifically referring to our own individual situation. So it's in this way that we arrive at the crux of the matter, the need to transform ourselves just as the Buddhas have done. In other words, we need to travel or traverse the exact same path. Thus, when we prostrate, pay homage, we are respecting the Buddha also that we will one day be. So I find this a very, very extraordinary reflection, because it completely short circuits, it undermines any conceit of self-failure or limitation, any self-denigration, any angst that we're incapable or insufficient and so forth. All of the material that spurs and feeds our neuroses and blocks us from traveling in a positive direction. So might just touch on the three the qualities of the Buddha in terms of body, speech, and mind, and then we'll move on. The enlightened qualities of a Buddha's body is as adornment with the major and minor marks. Nothing in a Buddha's appearance is unpleasant to the eyes. A Buddha is helpful and a benefit to all beings, even by merely seeing them, hearing them, or thinking of them. And each and every light ray emanated from a Buddha's body has the capacity to lead countless beings on the paths of maturation and freedom. As to the enlightened qualities of speech, Buddha's speech is endowed with 60 melodies, and the utterance of even a single language has the capacity to reveal at once the teachings, both brief and extensive, pertaining to both the profound and vast aspects of the path, appropriate to the fortunes of each sentient being in their own languages. And through this, a Buddha's speech can lead beings to the excellent paths of maturation and freedom. Just a sort of comment here, when I had amongst many other thousand people, had the fortune to go to Ladakh to receive the Kalachakra initiation in Leh several years ago. And His Holiness, in the middle of, is getting ready to confer the Bodhisattva vows. And he spent a considerable amount of time looking up into the sky and having a conversation. And it was clear that the audience, that the palpable audience that was gathered there in the valley of, the Leh Valley there for the teaching, they were out of doors. He wasn't addressing us, he was addressing these other beings. And His Holiness actually stopped to tell us what he'd been doing. And he said there were many other beings present with us today. And so he was talking to them as well. They were also going to take Bodhisattva vows. So just mention that. So regarding the enlightened attributes of a Buddha's mind, a Buddha knows in a direct manner the entire field of knowledge, the way things truly are and things in their diversity, as well as the natural inclinations, mental dispositions, and habitual tendencies of sentient beings. Given that a Buddha's compassion extends to all sentient beings without discrimination, holding them most dear as a loving mother holds her only child, they never waver, even for a moment, from the right time to help sentient beings tame themselves. So for Buddha's enlightened activities aimed at taming beings, these come about spontaneously, without effort and without interruption. Thus, a Buddha's enlightened activities have the capacity to engage in each and every moment with their welfare of infinite beings, with the welfare of infinite beings without hindrance. Thus, Buddhas have fully realized the ability to secure the perfect welfare of all beings. So for this reason, we have to make the following resolve. And I'm going to make the resolve based on a very beautiful passage from Gaurong Sultram Nima's text, which is found in this very, very incredibly beautiful and precious book that's just been released called Stages and Transmissions and of the oral lineage, of the Geluk oral lineage. And it's an incredibly precious collection of, in many cases, very, very rare texts that have not before been translated. And it's really dealing with the kind of oral pith instructions that are often secretly transmitted from teacher to student over many, many generations, such as the Ganden ear whispered lineage and so forth, stemming from Tsongkhapa and then Sapa and so forth. So it's very, very precious. And so the text I'm quoting from is a letter of final testament sent upon the wind. And I have to slightly adjust it, but I'll talk to you about that. So we're to think, quote, on my part too, and as long as I have not actualized this state of Buddhahood, I will fail to realize fully even my own ultimate welfare. Therefore, I must strive with my best to attain the precious state of Buddhahood, the complete fulfillment of the twin welfare of self and others. To this end, I'll engage in the meditation of Mahamudra on the basis of the profound path of Guru Yoga. So I'm going to creatively tweak the last sentence to read, based on my study of Shantideva's text, I'll engage in the meditation practice on the generation of bodhicitta on the basis of the profound path of Guru Yoga. And this is because Guru Yoga, from every angle, is the heart of the path. This is the title of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's very beautiful and important book on Guru Yoga. As the Lamrim points out, to consider the Guru as distinct or somehow apart from the Buddha is to make a fundamental category mistake. In Lama Tsongkhapa's, in Kabje Zopa Rinpoche's words, quote, Padmasambhava, the second Buddha, explained why we need a guru in the following way, quote, if you don't recognize the Guru as a Buddha, your mind cannot be liberated by blessings. Therefore, reflect on the qualities of the Guru and then make request to him. So this profound sentiment, this same profound sentiment, is also evident very significantly in the very last verse of Shantideva's text, where he says, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters through whose kindness I develop. So I want to propose here there's something incredibly important to think about, that the entire text, if you like, is being bookended and its contents sort of protected and preserved in a vital form between this description of the perfect qualities of the Buddha and the perfect qualities and of the Guru. And so we bring those two together in our refuge practice. So I'm now going to proceed a little bit more quickly. After the expression of homage comes the author's commitment to compose. And this is in the Bachelor translation is given as verse 1b. So he subdivided the verse into two parts. And he says, the text says, here I shall explain how to engage in the vows of the Buddha's sons, the meaning of which I've condensed in accordance with the scriptures. And the Padmakara translation reads, according to tradition, I shall now in brief describe the entrance to the Bodhisattva's discipline. There is nothing that has not been explained before, and I have no skill in the art of rhetoric. Therefore, lacking in intention to benefit others, I write this in order to acquaint my mind. I'm continuing on the next 2 verses. For due to the acquaintance with what is wholesome, the force of my faith may for a short while increase because of these words. If, however, these words are seen by others, equal in fortune to myself, it may be meaningful for them. Now, Geltsabje, in his outline, breaks this down into 4 subdivisions. Firstly, identifying the subject. Secondly, rejecting the fault of self-creation. Thirdly, rejecting repetition. And fourthly, identifying the purpose, the essential purpose and its relation. So you can discover this yourself. I've actually included Geltsabje's commentary in our folder, and I've mentioned too that many of our oral commentaries are also following the same outline. So identifying the subject refers specifically to the line, I shall now describe in brief the entrance to the Bodhisattva discipline. And the Venerable Fedor, in his translation, which was the basis of Geshe Doge's, when Geshe Doge gave his commentary, translated as to the discipline of the Tathagata's children. Now, Batchelor, in his translation, refers to vows. He says, I shall now explain how to engage in the vows of a Buddha's son. So at a glance, we might think that this is referring to the Bodhisattva vows themselves. But it's clear from its context that this isn't the intended meaning. It's referring to the vows as a system of discipline. In other words, a behavioural decorum, which constitutes the distinguishing mark of a bodhisattva's actions. Geshe Tekchok says, Dom, which is translated as vow, does not mean vow only. It can also give a comprehensive summary, giving all the important points succinctly. Explained in detail, it is very extensive, but everything is summarized. Thus, Shantideva is saying that his brief explanation will summarize the meaning of all the instructions given to bodhisattvas, which come down to the stage of generating bodhicitta, the initial stage, the stage of training in conduct, and the stage of gaining the result. So here we have, the entire map of the path, of course, starting from now. So in other words, it refers to the disciplines in which one must engage, namely the 6 perfections. So Shantideva's text is thereby declared a compendium that contains all the stages of the path that will cause one to achieve enlightenment. The second subheading is rejecting the faults of self-creation. And this refers to the line, there is nothing here that has not been explained before. Shantideva's purpose in saying this is to dismiss at the outset any accusation that his text might be a personal fabrication based on his own idle or idiosyncratic thoughts or egotistical agendas. It's therefore a declaration that the compendium is authentic and reliable as it belongs to an existing proven body of sacred Mahayana Buddhist scriptures. This cautionary note is perhaps timely in our own current age, where the proliferation of digital media networks fosters, unfortunately, an erosion of truth, false facts, as Donald Trump is so quick to say. In the ancient Buddhist tradition, there was a charming tradition of the leading scholars and meditators of the day gathering in a special forum to debate the qualities of a new text that was about to be published. And if during that debate the text fell over, was found to be faulty, it was tied to the tail of a dog who was then made to flee from the village or from the monastery. So I just mentioned that. It's really referring to the kind of rigor with which texts have been preserved on the basis of being authentic. We're not mixing them with whimsical fabrications from any Tom, Dick or Harry. So this fate of evicting the dog, tie it to the tail of a dog, is the opposite of what occurred when Shantideva delivered the text, as I indicated last week when I told the story. Because when the monks actually heard Shantideva's delivery of the text, they realized the appalling extent of the degree of their error in wishing to evict Shantideva, thinking he had nothing meaningful to say. But Shantideva, for his own part, went anyway. So it was almost as though the wish for Shantideva to leave couldn't be revoked, even after those particular monks and auditors, witnesses of that incredible presentation, maybe lived to regret. So this is why it's so important before we start studying a text to ensure its validity, its authenticity, so we can 100% entrust ourselves to it. So the third point is rejecting repetition. And this is indicated by the words in the root text which say, according to tradition, I shall now in brief describe. Galtsabje indicates that Shantideva rejects any charge of repetition because he is explaining the teachings in a condensed way so that the meanings of the scriptures can be easily realized. So Geshe-Doga, when he covered the same point, emphasized the fact that we are living in a time of degeneration. And hence the fact that Shantideva has offered a condensed presentation, yet one in which nothing whatsoever is missing, evidences Shantideva's extraordinary, and we'll have to add extraordinarily visionary kindness, even or especially to us today, when due to the multiple demands of our culture, we barely find the time to read anything coherently, let alone cover the enormous expanse of the subject matter of the scriptures. So this condensation is kindness because it facilitates our capacity to practice right now when at any moment death can strike, impermanence can strike. So also, Geshe-Doga added, we lack wisdom, enthusiasm, and on top of that, we're very lazy. Are we very lazy? So again, it's very kind. Now, to establish the fourth point, which is identifying the purpose, the essential purpose and the relation, Galtsabje identifies the subject first. He says it's the Mahayana path and its result are the subject. Secondly, the purpose is then to ultimately gain enlightenment, independence on this. This is the essential purpose, to gain enlightenment, independence on the Mahayana path. And thirdly, the relationship is explained, that the latter, says Galtsabje, does not come about without the earlier. So this causal sequence is clear. Attaining enlightenment as the essential purpose is contingent on applying ourselves to applying the subject of the text so that we can traverse the Mahayana path and thereby achieve its conquering result. So the text won't work unless we work with it dynamically. That's our great challenge as readers of the text. So the second verse is a sort of manifesto or a kind of declaration of humility and joy in the composition of the text. And the verse reads, "There is nothing here that has not been explained before, and I have no skill in the art of rhetoric. Therefore, lacking any intention to benefit others, I shall write this in order to acquaint it to my mind." So Gelt Subje indicates that this answers a hypothetical query that might arise, which is, if this text was written according to the teachings of the Buddha, and one needs to attain realization's independence on the teachings of the Buddha, then why did you compose the text? In other words, isn't the text superfluous or redundant if the teachings are already there as the word of the Buddha? So Geshe Doga, as Geshe Doga indicates, it is as though Shantideva is now effectively responding to that hypothetical objection that has just been described, thinking, there are two reasons why I have not written this treatise for those who can easily realize the meaning of the subject matter by depending on the teachings of the Buddha. So, in other words, this treatise is not intended for those who can easily realize the meaning of the subject matter by depending on the teachings of the Buddha. Due to his profound humility, Shantideva is proposing that he is one of those, and so are we. Secondly, Shantideva is testifying that he lacks poetic proficiency. So again, this is what means of testifying his humility, because as readers we know the sheer beauty and power, evocative power of Shantideva's language, even in translation. It is deeply poetic and poetically moving at every turn. In other words, Shantideva's text is of the highest and most eloquent order of literary expression. So Shantideva is also suggesting that he cannot add any extra meaning to what has come before. Again, this is a manifestation of modesty as well. And it's also an antidote to Shantideva's own pride. It's also to deflect those who would applaud a text due to its poetic proficiency or splendid rhetorical flourishes alone. In other words, some texts we worship because they're beautiful to read, but it doesn't mean that their content is meaningful or valuable. So that's a danger, which Shantideva is dismissing by saying that his text has no poetic proficiency. We don't want to get caught up on the poetry level because we're going to miss out on the meaning. So in a subtle way, the implication is also that those who believe they can somehow recognize and realize the path without relying on standard scriptural resources are steeped in foolishness. Surely it is best to rely on what has already been tested and found to be read by generations of practitioners before us who have directly relied upon the Buddha's words. So in other words, when Shantideva is saying there's nothing here that hasn't been said before, he's actually, you can turn that into the most incredibly positive statements, because what has been said before precisely because it is so valuable to say at all. And it will be continually said. So our own little part is being played here in preserving and hopefully helping to transmit Shantideva's texts and the purpose into the future on our own parts as well. I'm not just referring to me as a so-called sort of teacher here. We're all engaged in this process. So the reason for the joyful composition refers to the lines in the text which says, therefore, lacking any intention to benefit others, I write this in order to acquaint it to my mind. So this is perhaps an astonishing claim, isn't it, for a great master of the teachings, especially one who is intent only on benefiting others. So what is going on? If we follow Gyaltsabje, Shantideva is effectively here laying out a lesson in the form of an example of best practice. This text will be of benefit if I acquaint my mind with the contents so that I've initially understood, in order that my practice will grow and flourish. So Geshe Doga, when he was dealing with this point, stressed that in his experience of Western students, of course very extensive, Geshe Doga had contact in 1981, 1982 at Kopan with Westerners, and then was asked by Lama Yeshe, with the blessings of His Holiness, came to Australia and began to teach at a teacher centre. So he has, in 1983 technically, has very extensive knowledge of Westerners. He says so often they tend to jump in with enthusiasm and then quickly grow bored and launch into something entirely new. Can any of us relate that to ourselves? So a restless, even a reckless behavioural pattern is not conducive to a burgeoning understanding, let alone any experience in terms of practice that is being demanded of us as we approach this text. So Shantideva in these opening verses is being very particular and very careful. He's demonstrating that we must be fully aware of how our own minds are different. The subject matter is not yet realized by us. It is perhaps painfully incomplete. Therefore, indeed, we do need to acquaint our minds, just as Shantideva is proposing by way of example that he himself is doing. So Shantideva is using his own example as an exemplar of how we should behave. So this is rendered explicit by the next verse, which again professes humility, but is perhaps a clarion call for us to notice and embrace the great opportunity that is presented to us by the text itself. And the text, verse 3 reads, "For due to acquaintance with what is wholesome, the force of my faith may for a short while increase because of these words. If, however, these words are seen by others, equally unfortunate to myself, it may be meaningful to them." So this contingent may, is actually, I think, delightfully playful, because it's obvious or certain that the words will be of benefit to us. But to declare that they will be on Shantideva's own part would prove immodest. Likewise, his reference to those equal in fortune to myself, vis-a-vis equal in fortune to Shantideva. If we dig deeper, we can acknowledge that we are of equal fortune, Shantideva, in a very particular sense, which is that somehow miraculously we have stumbled upon this concise compendium of instructions concerning how to enter and engage in the Bodhisattva's path. So what could be more fortunate than that? So there's also the implication that when we do engage in the path, we can also obtain the state of supreme realization and abandonment of the Buddha. And as His Holiness says, this is our birthright, and to believe otherwise is to denigrate our great capacity for transformation. So to conclude this setting up of the text, for our involvement, we can again remind ourselves of the marvelous passage I quoted last week, in which Kunsang Pelden indicates that the act of paying homage, together with the promise to complete the work, together with the humility and joyous enthusiasm, which we've just been describing, apply, says Kunsang Pelden, not just to the composition of the treatises, but to any activity, whatever, of explaining, of listening to the teachings, meditating on them, and so forth. They ensure that whatever one does will proceed without impediment, and one's task will be brought to a good conclusion. The two poles of intellectual arrogance and lazy depression will be avoided. End of quote. So we are to courageously arise to the challenge right now, not with the challenge of an ordinary being, but with the lion's roar of an aspiring Bodhisattva, confident in our lineage, our intended lineage as a child of the conquerors. As Chandrakirti famously indicates in his Madhyamika-vatara, independence on, quote, the compassionate mind, non-dual cognition, as well as the awakening mind, Bodhisattvas proceed on the path, and it is from Bodhisattvas that Buddhas spring. Chandrakirti's actual words were, Buddhas are born from Bodhisattvas. So we've now arrived in the text at the commencement of the actual stages of the path, but we should feel that all this preliminary work, which has taken 2 sessions, has been done in order to position ourselves in relation to the text and to comprehend Shantideva's own purpose in composing it. And it's also indispensable in recognizing the manner in which we can make our own lives meaningful. Additionally, make our own lives meaningful with a particular urgency. There is no time to waste. And so this is why in Gyaltsen Sabje's outline, we have the headings. Exhortation to take the actual explanation of the stages of the path falls under 2 categories, and then he gives the 2 categories. Exhortation to take the essence on the basis with its freedoms and endowments, and that's referring to our precious human rebirth, and the method of taking the essence. So this is sort of in summary, the description of the rest of the chapters. So we'll begin the session next week with verse 4, and we are going to be able to move more rapidly with verses at time. So I hope you haven't found it too difficult dwelling so much on these points, but I think you'll agree that if they do register, they're incredibly valuable for the path ahead. So are there any comments or reflections? Stephen.
If you don't mind, Dr. Ross, I'd like to ask a question about last week's class.
Yeah.
We were talking about generosity.
Yeah.
And how bodhisattvas give away their body, their possessions, and their sources of merit.
Mm.
You know, and often when we dedicate, we just dedicate our merit. So what is the distinction you're making there between sources of merit and merit itself?
I think it's really referring to the mind generation that is able to produce merit. So we're giving that mind, because the merit itself can be expended, exhausted. But if we give someone the capacity to develop the root of the mind of generating merit, they can infinitely unfurl that in their practice right up until the point of enlightenment. So you'd have to then argue that to give the source of merit, if you like, is more precious than giving merit itself. That's just my feeling. And also it means that there's nothing remaining. We're not just giving things, but we're giving the capacity to give things as well away. Because by doing that, we create the karma in our own selves of overcoming all attachment, but we also give the opportunity to others to gain a great gift, a vast gift, unimaginable otherwise. So I in my own sort of studies, I often reflect on the meaning of a field of virtue in the same way as your question sort of invites, because a field of virtue is the kind of space or the arena in which virtue can appear. And this is really quite a remarkable thing to think about, because if we remove sufficiently the domination of our negative, compulsive minds, we then have the inkling of the opportunity to perform virtuous actions, and they can dwell in this space of potential if we keep our afflicted minds at bay. And so this field of virtue has to be nourished and enriched so that even our smallest virtuous actions and even our smallest purification of non-virtuous or restraint from non-virtuous actions will successfully accumulate and build up a very, very powerful, meritorious momentum. And so a field of virtue is actually a very beautiful thing. And I read very widely because I'm a very curious person. I've been reading books on child abuse recently. And I have an op shop here, which is an op shop, a secondhand shop, where people give their books. And some really, really interesting books turn up on the shelves for $1 or $2. And I was just reading a very powerful account of childhood trauma. And the author came to the conclusion at the end of this very moving serial accounts of many, many different sort of situations of abuse, of the remedy for healing being love and compassion on the basis of social contact and support. And he gave an example in the same way that Kubler-Ross gave an example in her book on dying of the most powerful nurse that she'd ever met, which was a particular woman who looked after traumatized children in the most remarkable way because the children flourished. And the author of the book on child abuse asked the woman what she did, and she said she gave them hugs. She held them. And it was an extraordinary answer, because that became the field of virtue, if you like, in which that child could then begin to once again blossom. And in other words, it's a protective space. So it's quite a beautiful idea. So I think, part of the Dharmakaya, if you like, there's this sense that it's also an absolute expanse of virtue from which all potential spring. And there's a verse a little bit later on, which we'll be looking at in Shantideva, where he says that even, the single kind thought that we might generate is through, the blessings of the Buddhas. I think there's something being said there along those same lines.
Thank you, Ross. That just made me think also of one of the qualities of generosity, which is to give fearlessness.
Yes, it's true. And rather tragically, how the giving of fearlessness seems to be the opposite of what a lot of people are giving at the moment in the dreadful wars that are being executed in our time. Are there other points or reflections or questions? So I've discovered, just because of the way when I'm presenting, I'm not quite sure where I'm going to get up to. And so I haven't been pre-preparing my quizzes for that reason, because I don't want them to be in advance of what we're tackling. So I am going to take a day or two after a teaching to get the quiz together. So the point is, it's not really urgent that we do the quiz tomorrow or the moment we get it. It's really an outline of pivotal or key points upon which to pin our understanding of what's being dealt with in the topics of the text. And so it will be a very useful way to lead us back from the quiz to the various commentaries, because I'm extracting and drawing upon the commentaries myself. And so you're able to go straight to the commentaries and to explore what the various teachers say about the significance of Shantideva's expression of humility, for example. Why is it so important that Shantideva sets that up with such force at the beginning of the text? And so these are topics that you can explore in your own way, so that when we finally get to the exam for those students who are enrolled and wish to sit the exam, you'll be able to add into your answers material that you've already thought about and researched based on your own explorations of those topics. And so the quizzes aren't designed to sort of give you a mark out of 100 or anything there. In fact, they're not going to be marked, as I said, directly by me at all, for that very reason. I don't want to intrude on the creative play that you have as you sort of navigate around the topic. I often find with these things that, you're studying a particular text and then you open a book and there's this incredible thing to think about that relates exactly to what Shantideva was just talking about in his verse. And so it's these sorts of almost magically coincidental associations that occur in the course of our lives that we need to recognize and incorporate, because this is how we actually integrate our understanding. So at times I might seem a little academic, but I'm not an academic person. I see myself as an emotional kind of a little bit poetic person as well. I like language and all that sort of stuff, but I love the fact that I can explore the rigor of the presentations in the classical commentaries, because they will answer even very, very fine and subtle points of query. And so we need to work from both ends. So is everyone feeling confident and happy about their engagement with the topic? And it's going to be quite a ride. It's an incredible journey, this text. And I'm going to have to condense quite a lot of material to get through it. Because as I mentioned last week, as Geshe Jumper Tech Chok said, in order to teach this text as a basic program, one would have to travel as fast as a jet plane. So it's not always beneficial to travel as fast as a jet plane. That's why I've decided sometimes to go slower on certain points. So next week, amongst other things, we're going to be looking at the precious human rebirth, because that's what Shantideva does, and it's very significant that he does that next. But I'm not going to be going through an elaborate presentation of the precious human rebirth. I'm going to be inviting us to jump into our Lamrim texts, which are copiously available to us. So we'll do the concluding prayers. Thank you, Lou. At this point, dedicate the merits of the session.
Dedication prayers from Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine action spread into 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life, prayers, and wholeness to Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjanath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Tenzin Ursulhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially in the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Geshe Lobsang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the Able One in general, and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common siddhis. Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher leading your students toward wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path, you are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. Did you want to do any of these multiplying mantras?
We'll just do the first 3. I'm sorry, the first set of 3.
Okay, I'll try. Chom Dan Da Dejan Sheikh Padra Chompayan
Payan Dapa
So
Sope
Pai
Sange
Songe Nampa
Nampa Nangze
Nangse
Oki
Oki Gyalpo
Yalpo La
Locha
Chag Sel
Shalo
Lo
Jangchub Sempa Pa Sempa Chenpo
Chempo Kuntu
Kuntu Zangpo
Zampo La
Lachag
Chag
Shal
Sel
Lo
Lo. I'll just do this
Tayata.
once. Yeah.
Okay.
Tayata Panchagriya
Panchagriya Ava
Avadani
Bodhani
Swaha
Swaha
Om Duru
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 Jaya
Yaha
Mukhi
Mukhi
Swaha.
Swaha.
So thank you very much. And it's delightful to spend some more time together. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very